Hello and welcome to The Actor and the Engineer. My name is Paul James. I am the actor.
My name is Josh Knapp. I'm the broadcast engineer.
All right, here we go. Number 2 week in a row where everything's semi-normal, dude. What's up? I'm a little scared.
We're on a streak.
Woohoo! 2 times!
2 in a row. So today we're talking about a movie that you specifically asked to talk about. It's Bad Times at the El Royale. Came out almost 2 years ago now, and it's written and directed by Drew Goddard, who people might know as the writer of Cloverfield, writer of Cabin in the Woods and The Martian. He also created the Daredevil show on Netflix. But I'll just give a quick overview of it. It's set in the late 60s. It centers around 4 guests to a past its prime motel that's like right on the border between California and Nevada. Half the rooms are California, half the rooms are in Nevada. And then throughout the film, we kind of get to know the backstories of all of the characters that are visiting the guests. And of course, they have nefarious backstories and motivations, so we get to find out about that. And then somewhere in there, Manson-style Chris Hemsworth shows up, but you've got Jeff Bridges, you've got Cynthia Erivo, you've got Dakota Johnson, John Hamm, Nick Offerman's at the very beginning, real quick at the very beginning, and a bunch of other great actors actually in this film. Lewis Pullman, I hadn't seen him in anything, but he's in this movie. So, yeah. What drew you to this movie at this time, and what made you want to watch it and talk about it?
Well, I don't know if you remember, but you had said that you were going to go see it, and did you want to do a podcast on it? And I said, I'm not an ensemble movie person. And that's ironic because most of the plays that I've done have been big ensemble pieces. The last play that I did, it was 14 people, played 44 characters. So on stage, I seem to not have a problem with it. But on film, they just seem to not work. There's like 3 or 4 performances that are really good, and then the rest of the movie just doesn't work. And so I had my doubts. And somehow, some way, it got taped on my TV, my DVR. And my father's like, "What's that?" And I was like, "I don't know." And I was like, "Oh yeah, I've heard about this. I don't want to watch this movie." I was like, ensemble. But then I saw the cast list and I thought, okay, well, you can't go wrong with this cast. You just cannot go wrong. And in a matter of 5 minutes, I realized how wrong I was about the film, totally in general, that I might have to rethink my ensemble character movie take. This film is the definition of character development. If you need to have a case study of what it's like to have characters that are developed throughout a film, this is the movie you should watch. If you're teaching a class and people don't understand character development, meaning people's past history, because there's a lot of definitions of character development that people throw out there. A character can develop and have an arc in the actual narrative of a movie, and that can be considered a character development. For me, it's about a backstory. And this film is filled with it. I love the idea of a hotel that sits on the border of California and Nevada. I love the idea that it used to be this swanky, high-class place, and now it's not. Although it does look very cool. And, by today's standard, it would be cool to stay there.
It'd be very kitschy, yes.
Very kitschy. Well, actually, it would just be retro or, like, it would be like going to that place in Pulp Fiction where they win the dance contest.
Jackrabbit Slims.
Yes, I could have thought of that. I had Jack. So I like the fact that it costs $1 more to stay in California than in Nevada. And the answer is because it's California. I love things like that. You're wondering the whole entire time what's happening in this film, who's good, who's bad, if anybody's good, if anybody's bad. And then it has these twists and its turns that I found interesting. So that's the reason why once I watched it, I was like, oh, this was really good. What was I thinking? And then that's when I texted you, hey, we should do this movie just because I am wrong.
This is going to be an interesting podcast because I'm not a big fan of this movie.
Okay.
So I texted you way before. Steph and I went to go see it when it came out in the theater, and I ended up leaving the theater, and I didn't get a good feeling about it, and we'll go into that a little bit more in detail, or I'll go into that a little bit more in detail here in a little bit. But ultimately, it is a movie for me that, well, that's why I didn't respond to you or do anything after the initial, like, hey, I'm going to see this movie. Do you want to do a podcast on it? Like, if it was one of those like amazing hand of God moments that came down and touched me with the film, I would have pressed the issue, but I didn't. So it's been, radio silence on Bad Times at the El Royale for 2 years. But with you bringing it up, I didn't have any problem rewatching it, and I wanted to give it another shot. But ultimately, I went back to what I initially thought, which was that for me, this film is a bunch of amazing actors that really look good, and they're very talented, and they're just trying to do their best. Because I think the movie starts to fall apart about 2/3 of the way through the film. Actually, right around the time that Chris Hemsworth comes in. So it seemed to me that there were kind of like two stories that he wanted to tell, and he had to sandwich them together. And talking about Drew Goddard here, and so that was the hard part for me. It felt like there were two main plots, but the way that they came together in the ultimate climax at the end seemed a bit neutered to me. So yeah, but I think that the performances are amazing. Cynthia Erivo, this is the first time. I mean, this came out and Widows came out right around the same time, and it took me a while to catch up to Widows, but I think she's amazing in Widows, and I think she's amazing in this film. And Jeff Bridges, this movie makes me appreciate Jeff Bridges a lot because he crushes it. He has some amazing scenes, some really emotional scenes. He plays someone who has a failing memory, and so I believe him. It's a well-worn, lived-in performance, and that's amazing. The best scenes are him and Cynthia Erivo just in a booth. I mean, there's some really great scenes. So and I can talk about the other actors. John Hamm's great in this, but John Hamm's, I think he's a consistent actor. So it's hard to say anything different about. I expect a certain level of performance from John Hamm, but yeah, and Dakota Johnson, I liked her performance too. Even though to me, that's where I want to get into a bit of a dialogue about some of these characters, because to me, her character seems to be underwritten, and I kind of have some problems with her character being set up next to these other characters. So the fact that this movie is structured the way that it is, much like Clue, or I was trying to come up with some other movies, Identity maybe, because it's kind of set in a hotel.
That's the film that made me go, ugh, ensemble pieces, snap. That's the one that snapped me. Yeah,
but or like Key Largo, like just like everybody's shoved together. You got to figure it out, and you got to like move forward, and we're gonna find out. That's the thing. You find in those movies, especially like Key Largo, there's films where you find out more about a character organically, whereas this movie shoves you into like a Lost style flashback, which is, I mean, it's fine, but it seems like we hit the brakes on the narrative, and then we go through, these backstories, and some of them are better than others, and some of them feel like afterthoughts. So, I mean, what do you think about that?
I don't necessarily disagree with anything that you said, but I don't have the 2/3 in. I felt what you're talking about, but it's sort of like that character, Chris Hemsworth's character, is sort of looming in the background the whole entire time. It's not like he's just introduced on that rainy day with no shoes on. And I always love movies because I don't know I don't know. Obviously, it's the part of California that meets Nevada, and I don't know what the weather's like there, but it hardly ever rains in Southern California. So it's all these movies are always set when it's raining in Southern California, although technically this isn't Southern California. But anyway, the point is that it's raining, and when that character shows up, you sort of have felt his presence the whole entire time. And the point of the movie is something that I think is consistent from beginning, middle, and end. It's about people wanting to do better for themselves. They want to stop the life that they have and continue on into something else. Every single character can be defined by that. Every single one. Maybe with the exception of John Hamm. Although, and let's just say spoilers at this point, because this is a type of film where I don't think that if you spoiled something, it would ruin the film for people, but it's also better to watch it first time.
Yeah, the trailer spoils all kinds of stuff. So if you've seen the trailer...
All right, so don't watch the trailer.
Yeah, the trailer got me to want to watch the movie, and then when I saw the movie, I was like, ooh, dang, yeah, I think maybe it would have been better if I would have come in not,
Yeah, you have a thing with trailers, though. You just do. It's
an art form. Trailers are an art form. I really enjoy a well-done trailer. And you're never going to know it's well done unless you watch it.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So I don't necessarily have a problem with what you were talking about. It goes back to the same thing we've talked about a million times. A performance can save a movie. A performance can make a movie for me. And the performances are stunning here. Dakota Johnson is amazing. She's amazing. Jeff Bridges, like you said, I don't understand that level. I don't understand how he goes there. And of course, my father has short-term memory issues right now. And so here I am watching this movie with him, and spoilers from this point on. The moment when Jeff Bridges can't remember his own name and turns to Cynthia Erivo and says, "Did I tell you?" Oh, it's so crushing. And so for me, I can live in a moment, and I thrive on that. And I've said this before. If I could get 30 seconds right on stage and live in that moment for 30 seconds, I've done what my soul needs. I've done it. So I'm okay with that. That said, I think I can find a justification for everything that you said that you didn't like up to this point. And 2/3 in, once Chris Hemsworth shows up, he's looming the whole entire time. And he is the epitome of a person who has no desire to change anything about his life. He is completely master and commander of his own life by commanding other people and being a cult leader and twisting people's brains into believing things to his own purpose. And even says it when you see that flashback sequence around the big fire, and he's talking about Jesus, and he's talking about prophets, and he's talking about all that stuff. And then he gets to two ladies to fight each other. And it's sort of a throwaway line, but I saw this movie twice recently, so it kind of stuck out. It stuck out the first time, but it stuck out even more the second time because I was listening to it. He goes, "Look, I could do anything I want to them right now, and they would have no idea. I could rob them. I could do this. I could do that." So other than his character, everybody else has a need to be in a different position in their life. It's obvious that Cynthia Erivo, who is masterful in this, she is now going to become my new obsession. I have seen her in so many things recently. She was brilliant Harriet, got nominated for the Oscar. She took a movie that was okay and lifted it to a place that was extraordinary, all on her back, all on her performance, which by all means, that's exactly what Harriet Tubman did to our history, for our history, for Black people's history. So for an actress to uplift a movie and make it extraordinary is just, that's talent. And she just is amazing in this. She was also in The Outsider, which is an HBO miniseries based on the Stephen King book, which I read and then saw. And she's not the character in the book. And I was like, I'm wondering why they cast her. And I'm trying to figure it out. And in a matter of like 10 minutes, I'm like, I like what she's doing better than the way he wrote it. And that never happens to me. So she's something special. And this music that she sings, if it wasn't for that voice, we would not be able to be dumbfounded like the characters are when they hear her. And that's exactly what happens to every single person who hears her sing in this movie, with the exception of Chris Hemsworth, because he is in a place where he's always going to be in that place.
But he's threatened by her. He's threatened by the power of her voice. I think that's a good part of the film. It just, for me, that puts him as a character in a tough spot. Like, he is supposed to be the person who's got command over the situation, and he cedes control to her, thinking that she's not going to rise to the occasion, and she does, and she kind of gets everybody else to turn towards her and focus on her, and steals his thunder, steals his ability to command the room. And he has to stop that with threats of violence.
He's threatened by her because she's not threatened by him.
Yeah.
Because in that scene, and I actually tweeted a gift about it, a GIF or GIF, however you say that.
I say GIF.
Okay. It's a big, long thing on Big
It's
Bang
not peanut
Theory
butter.
about whether or not it's GIF or GIF. Right. That's a joke on the Big Bang Theory. Anyway, I tweeted a GIF about it from that scene where he starts to speak to her and she goes, I don't care. I've heard it before, and shuts him down.
Yeah.
And it's so masterful how she just is like, dude, there's nothing that you can do to me that hasn't already been done. And there's nothing that's going to change who I am because you're now that you've come into my life. That said, back to the Dakota Johnson character, I think it's important that the character, she has a backstory, but it's based on her little sister. And it's based on the abuse of her father and what that did to her little sister, which led her little sister to Chris Hemsworth, Billy Lee. So what's important about, I think it would be self-indulgent to have one more character have a backstory in this movie. There's enough. There's 4 main ones. And then you get the hotel clerk's backstory,
Miles.
and that's a big one.
That's
Miles.
And it's
spectacular.
tacked on
He's
at the
spectacular.
end. He's good, but it's tacked on at the end, and it's real short, and it's just...
How would you put that in before that, though? How many people have you killed, Miles?
123. Yeah.
How would you put that in before that?
Okay, but okay, if we're living in this world of what do you do, I think that you just don't give any. You don't give any. It's the mystery. I mean, he does it. Drew Goddard does it right with the film canister, with the film reel. We don't know. We can guess who's on that film reel, but because it happened a year ago and the person's dead, the person who's on that film reel is dead now. So if the movie was set in the late 60s, early 70s, then it was probably, or if it was set in like 1970 or something, then it was probably, Robert Kennedy or maybe Martin Luther King Jr., but it was probably Robert Kennedy because he was alive a year ago and he isn't alive now. So it had to be somebody, in a high office or very, prominent who has died within that year. So, I mean, there's multiple reasons why you don't say that. You don't want to drag somebody's name through the mud or anything like that, even theoretically or even fictionally. But secondly, it adds intrigue to that device, to that plot device. But you could keep the intrigue for the clerk and be like, what did they have this guy do? Did he kill 123 people at the motel? I mean, that sounds insane. And we don't know, but that's not even anything I don't think that's anything that really needs to be addressed. And he's giving a great performance without the backstory.
I disagree with you because up to that point, all of the motivations of all the characters are based on their backstory. That's why I think John Hamm is taken out so quickly, or quickly in relative terms, because there's a whole lot of movie after he's taken out.
Well, it's the end of the first act, right? Isn't that the end of the first act?
Yeah.
I mean, it's setting the stakes and the tone of the film at that point. So you need somebody who gets cut off. He's the first kill or whatever if we're going back to talking about horror movies and stuff.
But everybody's reaction to Billy Lee is based on whatever you've seen up to that point. So you're believing that Miles Miller, Lewis Pullman, the actor, you're believing that Miles' redemption needs to come because of what he's done at the El Royale up to this point. But it didn't start there. He's not a junkie. He's not a heroin addict because he has seen all of that stuff that he has seen and done all of that stuff that he's done at the El Royale. He's a heroin junkie because he's never resolved the issue of killing 123 people in war. He's, post-traumatic stress. He hasn't come to terms with that. So to actually lead him into a place where it's easy for him to turn the other cheek and set up a camera to film possibly Robert Kennedy or whoever it may be is not based on the stuff that he did at the hotel. It's based on him being forced into a situation that was out of his control. And that's exactly what everybody's situation is, out of their control.
Yeah.
Now, one would venture to say that Jeff Bridges put himself in that situation that got out of control, but still it got out of control. His brother was shot. He went to jail. He now needs to find redemption because that money is not blood money. That money is based on people dying to save that money or to keep that money safe. So yes, did he cause that to happen? Absolutely he did. He made choices which that happened. But once that happened, his choices were no longer his own and he had to find redemption. And when Chris Hemsworth shows up, if these people were in a different place with their darkness, they might have followed Chris Hemsworth back to the beach. And they might all have fun nicknames at this point. Lyric could be Cynthia Erivo. Priestman could be Jeff Bridges, like Flynn, Boots. That's what they call the Dakota Johnson's sister. So in my opinion, I feel like it all made sense that once he showed up, this is the point where they have to turn this chapter and they have to become the people that they need to become to go on to the next step. And because they've had such tragic lives, it takes such a traumatic thing to happen in order to change it. And that's why when Miles sees the priest, or who he thinks is a priest, he's not trying to save himself at that moment. He's trying to save the priest from being involved in what he knows this hotel is all about. So he's like, you shouldn't be here, Father, you shouldn't be here. Mm-hmm. But at the end, when Chris Hemsworth is playing Russian roulette. Well, I guess it's not Russian roulette.
Regular roulette.
He's in control. Yeah, it's regular. And the stakes are death or life. When he's playing the black-red game, Miles now knows that the stakes are about his life and his redemption. That's why he needs to call out to the priest to say, hey, I need my absolution because I need to know I'm going to go to where I believe I'm supposed to go if I have absolution. So without Chris Hemsworth's character being there, would Miles ever have gone down that route? Or would he have just died of an overdose and never gotten his absolution? I don't know. I'm not trying to make this movie better for you. It just makes, a lot of times you say stuff and I go, oh yeah, that's a really good point. And then when you started talking about when it started to fall apart, I was like, yeah, but I see why it went the way that it went.
Yeah.
I have problems with small technical things in this film that only happens in a movie. Mm-hmm. Those are the small things, and we can talk about those later on. But other than that, I just thought it was masterful.
Yeah, I'm going to reel myself in a little bit by saying that, you kind of do, as far as plot is concerned, it's necessary to know that Miles, the bellhop guy, I almost said Miles the Teller, like Miles Teller, but he's not a teller. He's Miles the attendant. We have to know why he's such a good shot, why he's like a sharpshooter, essentially, because he's the one who kills most of those people, most of the ancillary characters that are part of Billy Lee's group. So it makes sense to get a backstory as far as like why he has those capabilities. But yeah, it seemed lean compared to the other characters. I know he's not one of the main characters, but I think that the flashback for Darlene is done so well and is done it's a single scene. It's very contained. And then they don't even really come out and say the eventuality of her interaction with the producer, but it's so subtle that if you're not locked in, you don't realize that her interaction with him, that she denied him, and that's why she's going to Reno, because he was like, you don't want to be doing headlining gigs in Reno for the rest of your life. And sure enough, she's going to a headlining gig in Reno because she didn't go along with with going out with him and whatever else he wanted to do to her. Yeah. So yeah, creepy, super creepy. So, but that shows integrity. Really, she is the paragon of virtue in this film. Everybody else has nefarious things going on. The only thing she does is she accepts having the, Flynn come into her, or O'Kelly, whatever we're calling him, Father Flynn, Doc O'Kelly, having Jeff Bridges come into her room to rip up the floorboards to get out the money so she can take half the money to help herself out. But that's really the only thing that she's done that's not completely like angelic, because she's just trying to make things work. She's just trying to make things happen, and that's the whole reason why she's there, is because that motel costs so little money that otherwise she wouldn't be making any money on the Reno gig. So, I mean, that is so well done that I compare all the other ones to that one, I guess. And so it's like, it can be done. The Jeff Bridges one's done pretty well too. It's very succinct and you don't need to know any more. John Hamm's version is a contemporary version of that, where we figure out who he is from his actions. There's probably 10 minutes, maybe, I don't know, 8 minutes of no dialogue, just him pulling bugs out and doing all those little things. It's also interesting, just in doing this podcast with you, I notice a lot more about how character motivations are informed by actions as opposed to by lines. Like the fact that John Hamm's character is so he's mad at himself and he's sad and he's really contrite at not calling up his wife and his daughter earlier, like he should have. I'm guessing that they're on the East Coast, he's on the West Coast, and trying, or close to the West Coast, and he's got to call her to put her to bed and do the bed night prayer. And so that establishes it's doing two things. He's pulling out all these wires and all these microphones and all these bugs from his phone while he's doing it. So we're learning that he knows what bugs are. We're learning that something's going on. And we're also learning that he has a connection with his daughter. He has a daughter and he has a connection with his daughter. And so later on, it makes sense that he is told not to do anything with this kidnapping situation, but he can't let it go because that could be his daughter. And so that's what moves him into there. And that's what ultimately gets him killed. But it's character motivated. And it's not something that he's like, man, but I have a daughter, J. Edgar Hoover. I'm really going to go in there. And, we don't need that. It's subtle and it's well done. I mean, it's surgery with a scalpel instead of with a mallet. There's other parts in this movie that I feel like mallets are used.
I don't disagree with you. And it's interesting because I didn't pick up on that. And now that you said that, I'm like, oh yeah, connected dots, Paul. I just thought that he does a very rigid thing for a living. He is obviously undercover. He obviously has a whole story. It's so great. Those are my accoutrements. He's so great in the beginning of that because you know what dawned on me the second time? Is he really looking for coffee? Is he looking for coffee when they show up? Or is he looking for other things and they show up and he has to make an excuse? So he makes that whole spiel because when he's trying to cover something up, he talks really fast. And so I thought, okay, it could be either way. He could be literally just looking for coffee, but it does make it interesting that it's so well written, in my opinion, that when I saw it a second time, I went, oh, maybe he is looking for something behind the bar there that he is looking, that you find out that he finds later on in the room. I just figured he saw something wrong, assumed it was something, because if you remember, when you see the shot behind the mirror, you see all of the stuff that Dakota Johnson has put onto the dresser, and it's rope and knives and different stuff. And
it's like a clue board. It's like a clue game board.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Hotel room number 1 with the scarf. I just assumed Drew Goddard was showing us that he actually legitimately is a good guy, that John Hamm Sullivan, and he says it so fast and so like it's so great. The way that whole beginning with him is spectacular. He is in control of his game. I mean, it's not bad enough that John Hamm is as good looking as he is, and he has a beautiful wife, and there's a lot of things about him that we know about that he has been lucky to come into life with, but he is talented and he just knocks it all out in the beginning. The point to that was that I just assumed he was a good guy and had to do the right thing here. Regardless of what his orders were, there's right and there's wrong. But be careful what you wish for, because you obviously stepped into a situation you knew nothing about, because that also sets that up for the audience too. You're thinking that this is a kidnap victim, and you're thinking, what is Dakota Johnson doing? And I'll bring up the thing that bugs me the most about the movie, and it's minor, but I hate when they do things like this. Why would she leave that door open so much? She's tying her sister up in a room and the door is open and you can see the office from the door. Come on now. And then later on, the door is open when John Hamm gets shot. Come on. I understand the reason why they had to do it that way, because you have to have Darlene see it, and you have to have an understanding as an audience member that there's something behind the mirror at the time. It's already been established that the mirrors exist, that tunnel exists, if you will, or that walkway exists. I find it pretty interesting that the screenplay was written so tightly that they had to put the dollar more in for California, because then if it was the same amount, people could have stayed in California, and that would have negated half of the movie, because they all had to stay in the same place because it was the cheapest part of the hotel. So that puts them all in Nevada.
Yeah.
And I love that the keychains have the states on them, the actual Nevada state and the actual California state. I love those kind of details. But I don't know how you would do it differently. I don't know if the curtain need to be open a little bit or what, but the reason why Dakota Johnson leaves the door open when she's tying up her sister is because the audience would never buy into the fact that the door is open again for when John Hamm gets shot. So the door had to be open the whole entire time. Like, she just didn't care enough to hide this kind of stuff. It doesn't make sense. It's a vehicle to get to, it's an means to an end, and I'm okay with it. But it just made me go, oh, was there no other way to do this? And I haven't thought of another way. Not that I'm even going to pretend I'm smart enough to come up with another way, but sometimes I'll come up with different things and I'll be like, well, that would probably have worked. So I don't necessarily understand why they made that choice, or he made that choice, Drew Goddard. But there's so much good here.
Yeah.
That sometimes I think our brains, yours and mine, our brains work a little bit differently than most people who go see movies. That said, sometimes my mind goes back to just being entertained by a story, and I'm not figuring things out that didn't work, or I'm not trying to break it apart, and I'm not trying to do anything but just watch what's in front of me and watch it unfold. That said, I have noticed when I'm watching a movie, the first time I see a movie, and I think I've talked about this before, I see the movie for what the filmmaker wanted us to see it as. It's the second and third and fourth time I see the film that the film starts to fall apart, and I start to see what everybody else critiqued about it. And then I go, oh, that's why. Oh, that's why they said that. Oh, that's why. The first time I see a film, my suspension of disbelief is so strong. I see whatever they wanted me to perceive from the film. So in a way, I'm kind of blessed. I'm fortunate. I can just watch this. It's just Goldilocks and the Three Bears. You know, she fell asleep and they caught her. It's just, the huntsman will show up and save Little Red Riding Hood.
Yeah.
He just will. So for me, maybe I just see things differently.
Well, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. There's some great scenes in the film. I mean, that scene that you were talking about with John Hamm kind of discovering each of those three rooms and what's going on in each of those rooms, underscored by the Darlene Sweet song, by Cynthia Erivo singing a cappella to just a metronome, is amazing. And the way that you kind of, use that, there's like that dolly shot of moving right across and just kind of seeing what Jeff Bridges is doing, then what Cynthia Erivo is doing, and then what Dakota Johnson's doing. I mean, it's really well done. But yeah, I mean, I think that I do. I mean, since it was my second time, I was definitely a lot more picky about what I was watching. But at the same time, like, just over the last month, I'm just gonna read off some of the movies that I've seen over the last month: Jaws, Rashomon, Do the Right Thing, Die Hard. I mean, each of those movies are very tightly written and purposeful, and some of them are the best films of all time. So, I mean, those are very top of mind for me right now. So I'm probably unfairly comparing this movie to those. So
super unfair, dude.
I have to keep that in mind.
Super unfair.
Yeah.
That's so unfair. Hey, by the way, have you seen Do the Right Thing before? Is this the first time you've seen it? Have you seen it before?
We're getting ready to talk about The Five Bloods next episode. So I'm doing I'm doing some research and actually I watched Do the Right Thing a couple weeks ago, but right now Amazon is up through, I think, June 29th or end of June, there you can watch Do the Right Thing for free. So on Amazon. So I think you might have to have an Amazon account, but you just go to Amazon and you can watch it for free. So that's awesome. There's a lot of movies that are, whether they're African American centric movies right now that are free. So you could definitely take a look at those and take advantage of that because there's some great films. If you haven't seen them before, then yeah, definitely go for it. And Do the Right Thing, I totally just missed the first time I saw it, which was probably 20 years ago. So, I mean, it was fairly early on in my critical movie watching venture. And so I feel like I have a lot more film knowledge now, and I'm still learning, obviously, but I understand the structure of that film, and also that it's one of those films where, I mean, I love films all shot in one day, and I'm sure we'll talk about it when we talk about Spike Lee's newest movie too, but I love the structure of a film like that, whether it's Do the Right Thing or Dazed and Confused. I mean, you give yourself constraints like that, and then you see how amazing filmmakers can thrive in something like that. And, that Do the Right Thing is all about tension, and it's all about just pressing on the gas. And it was a tough, I don't want to say it was a tough watch. It was an engaging watch, and I felt like I understood a lot more about what Spike Lee was trying to say than I did 20 years ago. I was also like, I don't know, I was in college and didn't really know much of anything. So, but yeah, it's a great movie. But yeah, and then so yeah, I watched Jaws in 4K, which looks amazing. So it's still a great movie. You say you watch Jaws every year, right? Around July 4th. So coming up.
Try to. Yeah.
So good.
And now I live closer to the beach where I grew up, and I'm like, oh no. I do want to say this. I was privileged to have seen Do the Right Thing in the theaters.
Wow. That's cool.
Yeah. Well, I'm 15 so years older than you, 20 years older than you. It was just like The Last Temptation of Christ. When you have a bunch of people telling me not to do something or be afraid of something, I'm going right to it. And I remember they kept saying stuff about The Last Temptation of Christ and how it was this and it was that. And I went and I saw the movie and I was like, did you see the movie? Because that's not what they say in the movie.
Yeah.
And you're not telling the truth. There's a few things that, without getting too specific about it. By the way, side note, you know how on 250th episode we did Martin Scorsese? Mm-hmm. We should do the 300th episode on Spike Lee, and you watch all the things that you haven't seen. And I think there's only two I haven't seen. We should celebrate him at the same time we celebrate 300.
That sounds awesome.
Or 350 or whatever it might be. But any excuse to watch his films is a good excuse for me. So 300 is closer than 350. Anyway, so I remember the big controversy with Do the Right Thing and everybody saying, be afraid and all this other stuff. And it's going to cause race riots and all this. And I was like, well, that makes me want to go see it more because what am I supposed to be afraid of? It's a movie. And I remember seeing it thinking to myself, I don't think people are listening. And that's always been the same thing I've said my whole entire life. People are not listening. They're hearing what they want to hear and they're saying a whole bunch of stuff, but they're not listening. They didn't listen in The Last Temptation of Christ and they're not listening in Do the Right Thing. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad because what Do the Right Thing did for me was allow me to know another filmmaker who I would follow the rest of my life. And I think with the exception of Mo Better Blues, which I've seen a handful of times since, I have seen every one of Spike Lee's films in the theater.
Wow.
Because that was such an experience seeing Do the Right Thing. So people just get off my soapbox. But so if you're telling people not to do something, forget about it. You can tell me not to do heroin. I'm pretty sure I'm not going to do heroin.
Wow.
But when you're telling me I'm not going to understand or I'm going to have a reaction to art based on what your reaction to art is or what your illusion of the art is, then I'm first one in line. So forget about it. Anyway, so we digress.
Well,
now, let me say this. Let me transition back to Royale. I don't think because of what you've been watching necessarily is a good barometer about how this movie was written. I see why you would say, okay, all of these movies, what do you call it? Movie real estate. All of these movies are condensed, well-told stories that you just listed. And Rashomon, come on. You can't put that in line with, it could only be in a line with Jaws and Do the Right Thing. You couldn't put it in the same conversation with anything in the last 25 years that have come out, with the exception of a few things. Anyway, the point to that is that I feel like it should be analyzed for what it is, not based on what your standard is, not yours, anybody.
Sure.
And so for me, I go back to the same thing I said before. I was engaged, I was entertained, I laughed, I cried, I felt a lot of stuff. And it's a little wonky in places, but for me, that experience of feeling and understanding when, oh my God, when the manager or producer comes and stands behind Darlene in the studio, it's heart pounding. And I will never be in that situation. Not like that. And pretty much not like that at all, but never, not like that. So to actually stand in somebody else's situation and feel it for what I'm thinking they're feeling is a powerful thing for me. And that this movie did that for me. So I will polish over anything else that might not work.
So was the ending satisfying for you?
Hell yes.
Okay. All right. And is it because the two best actors or the two best characters got out alive and were able to just kind of chill at a Reno casino, or what? I mean, was
yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. I was shocked by Dakota Johnson being taken out so violently and so brilliantly done when she's staring at her sister, and her sister's got that blank Macy May, what's that movie? Look on her face.
Marcy May Marlene.
Yes, thank you. You got the point.
Yeah.
And I thought I thought Boots at that time was going to have a transition as a character, and she doesn't, because when Miles shoots Chris Hemsworth, she stabs him. So she is in the exact same place. She does not have a character arc.
Well, but no, I mean, he's her father figure because she didn't have a father figure. Her actual father sexually molested her. So that's not a classical father. I mean, that's not a father figure.
Yeah, and also it's not probably as shocking to Boots to have her sister killed by that father figure because of all the things that her real father has done to her and her sister up to that point. Yep. So she's not shocked by somebody who has done devastating things to her sister.
Well, and death is not a big deal for her because they allude to it, but she did some sort of Manson-style killing, I guess. It was like a 10-second scene with her looking at a knife in somebody's backyard, but we can only assume that it's that.
I assumed it was her father.
Well, no, I assumed it was that because of the newsreels on the at the beginning of the movie where they're talking about the newsreels on the TV, and they're like, yeah. So anyway,
sorry, seen it twice and just connected that right then and there. Thank you, because at first I was like, I don't get why this is such a prominent thing in the film. The news being on. I just like the fact that the two people who were just trying to survive, and they were all just trying to survive, no doubt about it. But Cynthia Erivo, Darlene Sweet, does not shoot somebody with a shotgun in order to survive. She would not be shooting somebody with a shotgun before she knew exactly what the situation was. Although you definitely believe she would have shot Jeff Bridges in the face in the car. And you have to believe that because you have to, as an audience member, believe she would allow him to get in the car to begin with when they have that conversation about the money initially. So yes, back to the ending. The ending was satisfying to me because, one, I thought for sure that the young black woman in a film in the late 60s, early 70s, set in the late 60s, early 70s, would be just a happenstance and actually get shot when somebody else was getting shot, or stabbed accidentally because somebody else was trying to get killed, and she was taken out haphazardly, not purposefully. So it was good to see, one, a person of color live in a film. That's always good. The character being female and of color and living is always good because it's unexpected. We've seen it a lot more in films recently, but usually, back to The First Kill, you were talking about the horror films, it's, they even make fun of it. We talked about it in our last podcast about the black cameraman in Scream. And he's like, I'm not going in there. Have you not seen any of these movies? I'm the first to go. And we talked about Ice Cube living and blah, blah, blah in Anaconda. So that was great that she lived. And the fact that the two people who had the most human connection actually survived this worst case scenario. And so, yeah, I was satisfied by it. And I love the last shot with her hands going to the microphone and you seeing her long, fancy, well done nails. And she's set up as a singer and you see Jeff Bridges in the audience. And the last shot is her going to grab the microphone to sing the song in Reno. So, yeah, I was satisfied. What about it didn't you like?
It just felt, I mean, there was an inevitability to the end of the film for me. I mean, the first time when I saw it, obviously I knew what the ending was going to be, this most recent time, but it just felt like there was an inevitability to the film, and it built its pedigree on shocking you. The first scene of the movie is just this locked off camera that's pointing through what we now know is that two-way glass. And it's Nick Offerman coming into the room, getting all set up, pulling everything apart, putting the money in there, closing it all down, and then he gets shot in the back. So that, that right there is the establishing shot, and it establishes the tone of the film, which is you may think that everything's normal, but everything is not normal, and you don't know what's going to happen. And then at the end of the first act, you got John Hamm getting killed. And then it's like, there's your next establishing, scenario. It's like, this is John Hamm. He's the star of Mad Men, and we just killed him 30 minutes into the movie. So strap in. And then, like you said, close to the climax at the end of the film, where Dakota Johnson gets killed, you're kind of thinking maybe she's going to be a part of the eventual outcome, or gang up on, all this time and energy has been spent on her and her hatred for what Billy Lee's done to her sister, and she just gets unceremoniously shot in the head. And that's a shock too. But the ending wasn't, it didn't deliver on that shock potential, I guess I should say. I was expecting more of a twist. It's like there's a twist at the beginning of the movie where John Hamm is finding out all these crazy back corridors, and there's a couple other, shocking deaths, but then the end seems to be just an eventual landing of the plane, and it just seemed like there was potential there that was untapped. But maybe that's just me trying to be a little, I don't know. We're also watching a lot of Alias right now. Steph and I are watching Alias, and Drew Goddard wrote some Alias episodes. So the writer-director of this film wrote, 4 episodes of Alias. But there's every episode has a situation where the protagonist, usually it's Sydney Bristow, played by Jennifer Garner, gets into a scenario where you look at it and you're like, there's no way she's going to live. And then she always lives, and then she moves on. Something happens, and it's very, it's formulaic, but it's also satisfying. But I'm expecting less out of something like that than I am out of a $20 million movie. So, which I know this movie wasn't like insanely expensive, but it also wasn't cheap. And they built that whole hotel on a stage. So, I mean, they're not and actually, I think from what I read, nobody really took any money for this movie. And Chris Hemsworth and Drew Goddard worked together earlier on Cabin in the Woods. So I think Drew Goddard directed that one too. He co-wrote with Joss Whedon, and he directed it. So, and I love that movie. Cabin in the Woods, talk about taking a script and ripping it up and throwing it out. I mean, that movie is innovative in the same way that Behind the Mask is innovative, the film we talked about last week. So it just takes all of these tropes, all of these horror movie tropes, and it just kind of pulls them apart one at a time, and it reframes it in this weird backwards way. If you haven't seen The Cabin in the Woods, nothing should be said about it, because it is a shocking way of doing a horror movie, and it's infinitely interesting. And I was completely just flabbergasted when I saw that movie. So, and it's not, the paragon of cinema, but it's really innovative. And this film to me felt like it could have been more, but ultimately it was a really good acting exercise. It was a really good performance showcase for a few of these characters.
So let me ask you this. So, and I know what your answer is going to be because I know you by now, but what would you have done differently?
Well, they don't pay me to write movies, but...
Yep. Oh my gosh. I wish I had been able to record separately what I knew you were going to say. That's, with all due respect, and I respect you deeply, that's a cop-out.
It is a cop-out. You're right. It is a cop-out. But
if you're going to say, and I don't disagree with you, I'm not saying that I think that you are wrong. I understand exactly what you're saying. And I just realized that Nick Offerman leaves the door open in the first sequence and stands out in the rain and looks in the thing. And I have worked at a hotel, and people do leave their door open. It is the strangest thing. And people do a lot of things
with their
doors open. Oh my gosh. Don't even get me started. Anyway.
So, okay, what would I do differently, right? That's what you're asking me.
Yes.
I get it. But I think that I'm building the structure has been built for something that will shock the audience, and it's not a spoiler for The Cabin in the Woods, but the ending is something that shocks the audience. So that ends up being, I don't remember the end of Cabin in the Woods, but it's epic. So the end of this film, I was expecting it to be a little more epic, and it was a small ending.
But the word is expect. Your expectations were that it should have an epic ending. So respectfully discussing it heavily with you, one might say argumentatively on my part, with a smile on my face, if you're expecting something, that's not fair to the screenplay that you're watching. Because that screenplay is being written as a story, not as an expectation to be fulfilled by the fact that this writer has one of the biggest twists in a movie ever with The Cabin in the Woods. And it's an infinitely talked about sequence at the end of that movie for thousands of different reasons, without giving anything away, all the way down to the two actors who are primarily in the twist. It's shocking who they are, because they are considered they are Academy Award nominated and Tony Award winning and Emmy Award winning actors. And here they are in this slasher film or this Cabin in the Woods film. Anyway, the expectations of what you think a film should be is not a baseline for me, because I'm not expecting it to be anything than what it gave us. So if your expectation is that there should be something, a shock, if you will, or an unexpected turn at the end, then until I hear somebody say, well, they could have done this. And then I could put myself in the place of understanding that expectation. Does that make sense? In other words, if somebody said, well, if Dakota Johnson just shot everybody, including her sister, I was shocked by that. Then I could understand and wrap my brain around the fact that you think that that's what should have happened.
Yeah.
But if we're not talking about what we think should have happened, we're talking about what did happen. And if it didn't fulfill you, and I understand what you're saying. You're saying it didn't fulfill you because it wasn't unexpected.
It felt like the film was leading to something, and then it ended up taking a more pedestrian path. And it seemed like there was more in there, more juice in the orange to squeeze.
Or did it take the path it was supposed to take? Because pedestrian is judgmental. With all due respect, again.
Sure. Well, I'm trying to say that there were two roads, and he took the one most traveled.
Okay, that's fair. I hear what you're saying. I totally hear what you're saying.
Now, I don't know what's down the other road. I mean, I can sit here and try to come up with something, but that's me, with 24 hours out of watching the movie and not devoting my whole day thinking about it, compared to a guy who went out there and sold this movie for months of his life and spent a bunch of time writing it and not doing anything else. So, I mean, I'm kind of at a disadvantage here.
All right, so your homework is this.
Okay.
2 weeks from now, I'm going to check in on what your idea for the ending of this movie should be. All right?
Do you want my driver's license?
I want 100-page, 100-word paragraph on what you think. And 100 words is not a lot of words. How you think the ending of this film. I'm just messing with you.
No,
I get
I'm doing
what you're saying. Hey man, I have the memory of a god. I will remember this, so it will come back up, and other people will remember it too. All right, fair enough. It's all good. I feel like I'm fortunate in the fact that it might be a disadvantage, but for me, it's an advantage that I just take something for what it is and say, to me, nothing about the ending. Okay, fair enough that it was the path mostly traveled. Okay, that's fair. And if you had given me 10 endings and which ending do you think he would have ended it with? That is the ending I would have been more attracted to because it's the hopeful ending. It's the ending where somebody gets to spend their life, and she says it so well in the movie when she says, sing it. Why are you going to Reno to sing and paying all this money and staying in a cheap hotel? Why even bother doing it? And she says, singing. And I get that. Art is art, and you just have to do it. So to actually see somebody having enough money to just go and sing is satisfying to me.
So do you think that the film, last thing, do you think that the film is a collection of pieces and that collection has more good pieces than bad pieces, therefore you are happy with it? Or is it something that as a whole you enjoyed? Because what I wouldn't want to do is I wouldn't want to go into a film not having high expectations for the experience. Because if I go into a movie just being like, well, it's going to be some people on a screen talking on camera, then I have no, this is obviously not that. And I already spoke about all the great things about this film. And it's not, that's the hard part about this movie, is it's not a horrible film. It's not. And so it's like, it's one thing. I mean, I have less of a, I'm not as sad about, something that is just like a piece of crap to be a piece of crap, but to just for no reason other than to like, yeah, I needed to do this. I don't know, whatever. I needed to make this widget and I made it and I'm done and I'm moving on. But the people who are crafting these things with artistry, if I as an audience member don't have high expectations for it, I'm not doing my part as the audience. I'm not looking at it and saying, does this all fit together? Does this all work for me? Because it's just like, well, I mean, it's a movie. It's whatever. Steven Seagal Out for Justice is just as good as Parasite. It's not. I hate to say like they're both movies.
I hear what you're saying 100%. The answer to your question is, do I think the sum total of the parts are better than the individual parts? No. I think the individual parts are the best parts of this film, but I do think the sum total was satisfactory to my understanding of what this story was telling me.
Perfect. That sounds good.
Last thing. You did a really good job in that car rationalization about expectations there. I'm impressed. So I'm expecting 250 pages or words because you can turn a phrase and you're very elegant in your rationalization. I don't think an audience member should have an expectation per se. I think they should just be open to whatever the storyteller wants to tell you. And then if it doesn't pan out as a narrative for you, that's a different thing than, I hear what you're saying. You're saying that if I go into a movie and just expect to see whatever, then you're not doing your job as the audience member.
Yeah.
Totally get what you're saying. For me, it's the opposite. I go in thinking, whatever you give me, I'll take it for what it is. And if I'm still floating with it when I leave, then that's usually an indication that it's going to stay with me the rest of my life.
Okay, well, you're turning me to your side now, because you saying that, the thing that popped into my head was Upstream Color. And I had an expectation for that film because of Primer, but 5 minutes into that movie, it all went away, because I knew that whatever my expectation was not going to be met. It just wasn't. And that movie is infinitely interesting. I still roll that movie around in my head every once in a while. And it's hard to even say that movie is an amazing film, but that movie is a piece of art, and it needs to be watched and it needs to be talked about. And that is something that Shane Carruth gave to me, gave to you, gave to whoever has seen it. And it didn't meet any of my expectations. So yeah, I see where you're coming from.
Quickly, let's end the podcast. You agreed with me. Come on, quick.
All right, you can check us out on the web at actorandengineer.com. You can go to facebook.com/actorandengineer, and you can tweet us at actorengineer, and we'll see you next time.